So I went to see The Secret Agent and I have some thoughts about it. Going into the film, I really only had some vague ideas about what it might be like. I knew it was a Brazilian film starring Wagner Moura. I did know that it was something of a period piece set during the years of the Brazilian military dictatorship. And around the same time last year, I saw another Brazilian film that was a period piece set during the years of the Brazilian military dictatorship. I'm Still Here. I can't help but make a comparison between these two films because, I'm not Brazilian, and these films have sort of been an entry point into learning about this very dark period of Brazilian history. But if you have seen both films, you'll know that they are very different experiences. I'm Still Here was adapted from the memoir of the same name by Marcelo Rubens Piva about the life of his mother Eunice Piva. Eunice's husband, Rubens Piva, was a politician who was elected as a Sao Paulo congressman in 1962 and was a member of the Brazilian Labour Party. However, Rubens' political career was cut short 2 years later after the 1964 coup that overthrew President João Goulart and initiated the military dictatorship, which would last until the mid 1980s. After some time in self imposed exile, Rubens, Eunice, and their 5 children moved to Rio de Janeiro, where the film I'm Still Here begins. In January 1971, the Pivas home was raided by military forces, and Rubens was taken into custody. That was the last time Eunice, her children, or anyone on public record ever saw Rubens again. The film I'm Still Here follows Eunice's attempts to find out what happened to her husband. Her constant questioning resulted in her own detainment and torture over a period of 12 days, as well as the detainment of their daughter Alina. Despite Eunice's continued efforts to find out what happened to Rubens, the film follows her as she decides to eventually move her family back to Sao Paulo. Eunice Paiva went on to enroll at the Mackenzie University in Sao Paulo to study law and graduated and pursued a career advocating for the rights of Brazil's indigenous people, while also campaigning against the dictatorship and for the release of the archives of the victims of the regime. I'm Still Here is a fantastic movie about an incredibly admirable woman. It, of course, features a brilliant performance by Fernanda Torres, who, like Wagner Moura this year, won a Golden Globe for her performance and received an Oscar nomination. The film itself made history by becoming the first Brazilian movie to win Best International Feature, and deservedly so. Although the only other nominee from that year's category that I've seen is Amelia Perez, which.
From penis to vagina.
But as I come to my thoughts about The Secret Agent, I'm going to say that I'm Still Here is a very conventional film in a lot of respects. It's a straightforward narrative based on a true story biopic about someone who more people should know about, and not another biopic about people we already know everything about. Like, 4 movies? 4? Why not make it a mini series? That way more people can actually afford to go see. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. The Secret Agent tells the story of Armando, who is returning to his home city of Recife. Given the title of the film and the period of time that the film takes place in, we could make some assumptions as to why Armando has been away and why at the beginning of the film he takes refuge in an apartment run by Donna Sebastiana, a communist who offers her property as shelter for a number of political dissidents. We follow Armando as he visits his son Fernando, who is living with his maternal grandparents, and we also see Armando, who has assumed an alias, Marcelo, take up a job at the city's identity office. Meanwhile, in Sao Paulo, 2 hitmen are ordered to assassinate Armando by Henrique Guarocci, an executive director to Electrobras, which, for those who may not know, as I definitely didn't when I watched the film, is a real company located in Rio de Janeiro. As the film progresses, we learn that Girotti met Armando years before when Armando was the head researcher at the university in Recife, where the technologies they were developing were co opted by Girotti through the threat of cutting federal funding to the university's projects so that his private company could take advantage of their technology. Girotti also instigated a smear campaign against Armando in Sao Paulo and Rio newspapers. We learn all of this from flashbacks as Armando recounts the story to Elsa, a political resistance leader who is recording their conversations. Recordings that are also being listened to by Flavia, a history student in 2025. When we first jumped to the present day to Flavia listening to these recordings, I was really surprised, as this was the first of many diversions from narrative convention that the film takes. Not that characters in the present day looking or listening back to historical times that are the main focus of the film's plot is by any stretch a new narrative device, but what surprised me is that the film deliberately refrains from using this device as an establishing motif. In any other film, we would begin with Flavia coming into the university and establish what she's doing, why she's doing it, and then we would go back in time to 1977 and be introduced to Armando. But this film deliberately disrupts the flow of its own narrative by suddenly introducing the present day into its period specific timeline. For me, this was a bit of a shock when I was watching it because, in my opinion, it was a defiance of my own expectations of what a historical drama, quote unquote, should be. Another shock comes when the police in the film discard a leg in the city's river, only for the leg to become reanimated and violently attack gay men cruising in a local park. This reanimated leg is a part of a story that is being read in the newspaper by the residents of Donna Sebastiana's refuge, and it is in fact a reference to a real urban legend that circulated Recife during this time. This, in actuality, was coded language in the newspapers at a time when they were forbidden from reporting on the actions of the police, and instead reporting was conveyed to the public as the actions of this urban legend. So, with these two examples, the playing with chronology and the inclusion of this sentient leg urban legend, The Secret Agent is establishing itself as a pretty unconventional film. But in my opinion, the biggest break from convention is at the end of the film. At this point, the two hitmen who have been hired to kill Armando have enlisted a third person to carry out this assassination. This goes completely haywire when the third hitman is apprehended by the police, resulting in a shootout that results in the death of three characters, two of the police officers and one of the hitmen. But then we cut immediately to a newspaper article covering the death of Armando. Something which doesn't play out in the actions depicted on screen, but is instead delivered to the audience as secondary sources being uncovered by Flavia. From this point, we are completely finished with our 1970s narrative. Flavia is a history student transcribing the tapes that included the interview conducted by Elsa and Armando earlier in the film. Flavia then travels to Recife, where she meets with Fernando, Armando's son, who is now working as a doctor in a blood bank. In their conversation, Fernando recounts that he does not really remember anything of his father's death except what his grandfather told him, and that the blood bank is located where the cinema where his grandfather worked and where Elsa and Armando had recorded their conversation. The film ends with Flavia giving Fernando the tape of Armando's conversation, leaving the audience to imagine whether or not Fernando ever listens to it or not. When I was leaving the cinema, I just remember feeling odd. I know that I liked the film, but there was just something about it that left me feeling unsatisfied, for lack of a better word. That reveal of the newspaper article reporting on Armando's death was almost like an affront to what an audience should come to expect from a film like this. We don't get to see what exactly happened to Armando. We just know that somehow he ends up dead. We know that he was in danger from the hitman who had been sent to kill him, but that mission is presumably negated by the actions of the shootout between the hitman and the police. So what exactly happened to Armando? When I thought about why the film was unsatisfying, the best way I could describe it is that it left me totally in the dark, and instead of showing us what the outcome of this whole saga was, It purposely papered over its own ending. All we are left with is a newspaper article and the revelation that the sites that the film's actions took place no longer exist. Instead of that cinema still being there, it is now a blood bank in which the new generation lives and works, and yet somehow haunted by the memories that they can no longer have access to. And that is when I thought about the intention of the secret agent's intentionally misleading narrative. It is by design that we are not given the narrative satisfaction of seeing what really happened. Even if we know that Armando was killed, we still want to know the details. We want to know who did it and why. What was so surprising about The Secret Agent is its uncompromising resistance to give its audience that narrative satisfaction, because there remains a generation of Brazilians who are left with these unyielding questions. What happened to my loved one? Who did something to my loved one and why? I believe that when we tell stories, whether it be a film or a novel or a play, we can seek a form of comfort. But The Secret Agent could not tell a story about a topic that gives us that comfort because the topic remains unresolved. Like I said earlier, I can't help but compare The Secret Agent with I'm Still Here because these films have been an opening for me as a non Brazilian into this period of Brazil's history. And since watching these films, I have begun some amateur research into this period of history and how there remain so many people in Brazil today who seek answers to what happened. When comparing I'm Still Here with The Secret Agent, I describe the former as being a pretty conventional film, whereas the latter is pretty unique as far as fucking with the narrative flow itself as a means to invoking an emotional response in the audience. And as I'm writing this video, the Oscars were last weekend, and as much as I liked Sentimental Value, I do kind of wish the award for Best International Feature went to The Secret Agent. Both Sentimental Value and I'm Still Here are great films, but they are great conventional films. They are typical, straightforward beginning, middle, end structure, whereas in deliberately toying with the narrative convention, The Secret Agent, I believe, is trying to really make the audience engage in mental gymnastics. You can't be passive when watching The Secret Agent. You really need to be paying attention in order to draw your own conclusions as to what the film is trying to say. With I'm Still Here, you can simply watch what is being presented to you, and although the ending may not be described as satisfying, the tragedy of what happened to Eunice and her family remains an injustice that has yet to be resolved. There is something arguably cathartic about Eunice making the decision to move on for her children and to go on and make some remarkable achievements. I think in presenting Eunice's story in the film, there is a potential for some kind of satisfaction as an audience, that even in the direst of circumstances, we do have the capacity to overcome and keep going and strive. And it's not my intention to make any kind of moral judgment about how these two films present this piece of Brazilian history, because number one, who the fuck would I be commenting on another country's historical trauma? And two, I think what makes these films such an interesting comparison is that they present two very different stylistic interpretations of this historical moment. The way I see it, I'm Still Here presents the real life story of an incredibly admirable woman who overcame the injustice thrust upon her family by the government of her country, whereas The Secret Agent uses the medium of cinematic narrative to mirror the cultural and civil dissatisfaction at the lack of justice that has been offered to the survivors and loved ones who were left behind in the wake of the dictatorship. I don't think either film is better than the other. I think they're both absolutely unique gems of political art. Because, as some people seem to be forgetting, art is in fact political. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. I know that there is definitely a lot of cultural context that I may be missing out on as an absolute outsider to Brazilian history and culture. So please, if you're watching this and you're either Brazilian or you're more knowledgeable about these topics that I've touched upon, please let me know about it in the comments below. Also, if you are from Brazil, please forgive me for potentially butchering a lot of names throughout this video. I'm not a native Portuguese speaker, so I just have to do the best with what Google tells me how to pronounce things.
Wagner Moura.
Or if you're just a fan of the Oscar cycle and you've seen both or either I'm Still Here and The Secret Agent, and you have your own thoughts about what one could take away from these films, I'd love to hear about it. And I hope to be back again with another video very soon.